I find it very interesting as we read this parable that we so well know, the parable of the Good Samaritan. I find it interesting that one person who is at the center of this parable, the man beaten by the side of the road, that he's referred to as a man. No name, no identification of what he did, no understanding of where he came from. We're just told that he was a man and that he was beaten, left by the side of the road. That's all we know about him. We're told otherwise about others that we have some kind of identification. We certainly hear of the Jewish temple priest and the temple Levite who pass by and show no concern or compassion for the beaten individual. They had a function. They had a function in the in the temple. And finally, we're told about a Samaritan. At least we're given his background a little bit. A man who stops to help the man beaten. He cleans his wounds, he takes him to an inn, and agrees to pay all the expenses incurred while getting treatment at the inn. Now, at first hearing, we might be somewhat disturbed that the two temple leaders, those who apparently were leaders, those who knew the law that was quoted earlier about loving your neighbor, we might have expected that they would have helped and with the distraught victim. But surprisingly, they just go by, to not even attempt to do anything. And we might ask, how could their feelings be so dulled and their sympathy so indifferent? After all, they were religious people. Now, to give them a little bit of fairness, they could have been afraid to stop on the way because they really didn't know who the man was. He could have been a thief that just pretended he was beaten up and he would have robbed those two officials from the temple. They could have had other reasons too, whatever. But part of their thought too could have been, since they were temple people, there was a strong belief that if that man were dead, they couldn't go near him. All right? It would make them impure, and they couldn't do their work in the temple. So there's all kinds of ways that we can look at them. We don't want just to paint this awful picture of them. But on the other hand, there's the Samaritan. Okay? A Samaritan was not well loved by fellow Jews. There's a whole history behind that. But there was a disunity amongst them and a truly prejudicial hatred for Samaritans. And so for this Samaritan to be the one who attends to the wounds of this man might be completely surprised by that. At least those hearing this parable were. And I think there was an interesting thing too there that the first question that may have come out of the mind of that Samaritan was, what will happen to the wounded man if I don't stop? The others were asking the question, what will happen to me if I stop? Samaritan looked at it from a different perspective. What will happen to the wounded man if I don't stop? He makes it all sound so simple because he is not thinking of what will be the result for himself, but only of what he ought to do in this situation. The two temple leaders saw a man, and the Samaritan saw a human being in need. People today, and rightfully so, are very cautious about getting involved. We don't trust very much these days because good reason sometimes. Lots of crime around us, lots of people that are high on drugs, other people that we're just not sure what's going on with them. And so getting involved can become messy sometimes. It can be a messy business. We never know the amount of trouble that we might endure if we decide to answer the cry of someone along the side of the road. It is much safer and far easier to close our heart and go quickly by on the other side of the road. The greatest betrayal of our Christian duty is not to notice the sufferings around us, to close our eyes, to turn away our face, and to shrink back into the safe part of our private life. It would be so sad if we were to hear this parable and not ask ourselves these two questions. The question that Jesus asked, who is our neighbor alongside the road? And the second question, am I ready to follow the example of the Samaritan and follow the command of Jesus, go and do the same yourself? We're probably not going to encounter a person along the side of the road beaten up. Let's hope not. Probably not going to be our experience, maybe unless we lived in war-torn countries where there's plenty of violence, and there's plenty in our own country, certainly. But chances of that are not great. So who is our neighbor? Maybe it's the man or woman who is lonely and is a shut-in that lives down the street from us. He or she may want some companionship, have nobody to visit with them, no conversations to have. Maybe that's who's along the side of our road. Or he or she may be that widow or widower that recently lost a spouse. Life has changed so drastically. The house feels so empty. It would be so nice to have a visitor. He or she might be that individual that has just learned that they have a terminal illness. And now what? How do they deal with that? Do they have the insurance they need? Do they have the support to help them through this crisis? He or she may have recently lost a job and does not know how they're going to pay their bills, how to feed their family, where to find a new job. She may be that woman who has experienced an unplanned pregnancy, have lost a child in birth, and is dealing with all of those emotions and feelings, looking for guidance, somebody to talk with, to sort all this out. That man or woman may be dealing with an addiction to drugs, alcohol, pornography, and is really seriously looking for help, wants to move away from this, but they need somebody to support them and encourage them. He or she may be that asylum seeker who has traveled thousands of miles to escape poverty or violence. They want a chance. He or she may be that young person struggling with the pain of being bullied, a youth trying to figure out the complicated world that they're growing in, a youth that might be in a divided family and finds himself or herself wondering, what's wrong? Am I the reason? He or she could be that visitor who comes into our church and looks for welcome, looks for a greeting, a smile, a place that they feel they can worship in. He or she may be that immigrant that is struggling to learn our language and adapt to our culture, that feels lost in this new environment. The man on the side of the road reminds us that the will of God, the way of holiness, the imitation of Christ, discipleship, being a practicing Catholic, is found here and now. It's around us. The roads are filled with so many people who need our compassion. The test of the Christian love of neighbor is not found in grand pilgrimages to Rome or to the Holy Land, or reading Catholic classics or watching Catholic television. It is found in what we do with the person at the side of the road, the need that crosses our path. That need may be for money, it may be for our time, or our compassion, or our companionship, our contacts, our advice, our listening, or our help to get back on the road again. The needs are many that cross our path. As a Christian, we must not look away and walk on. The lawyer's question was, just who is my neighbor? The Lord's answer to him and to us might be this: don't worry about that. Just be a neighbor to the person who is in need and who crosses your path. That person is our neighbor in God's sight. One message to us of the parable of the Good Samaritan might be this: that we be as good a Samaritan to others as Jesus was and is to us.